Chapter 1. The question that wasn't supposed to be complicated. Sara Tanner had always believed that clarity was a form of kindness. It was one of the many reasons she had liked Sam Reynolds from the beginning, before she had fully understood how deeply that quality would come to matter. 7 months earlier, they had met at a conference neither of them had wanted to attend. It had been one of those overly polished corporate events that tried too hard to manufacture enthusiasm. Bland coffee, colder networking smiles, and name tags that turned everyone into a walking resume. Sara had been standing off to the side, pretending to read the schedule again, when Sam had leaned slightly toward her and murmured, "If I hear the phrase synergy one more time, I might commit a small but meaningful crime." She had turned to him, blinking once before laughing despite herself. "Define meaningful." "Nothing violent," he had said quickly, "but possibly involving sabotage of the espresso machine. For the greater good." That had been the beginning. After that, the conference had been entirely different. They had slipped out of sessions early, found a decent cafe down the street, and traded stories about work, family, and the strange pressures of knowing what you wanted while also not knowing how to get there. They had exchanged numbers without any theatrical hesitation. By the time the conference ended, they both admitted, somewhat sheepishly, that it had turned out to be the most enjoyable one they'd ever attended. The progression had been steady and intentional. Coffee meets became lunches, lunches became walks, walks became dinners that lingered without either of them wanting to leave. When they had finally agreed to start dating, Sam had been careful but not cautious. "I'm serious," he had said, sitting across from her at a small restaurant that smelled faintly of garlic and wine. Not in a heavy, overwhelming way. Just, "I'm not dating to pass time." Sara remembered studying his expression then. There had been no pressure in it, only steadiness. "That's good," she had replied, "because I'm tired of guessing what people mean." He had nodded once. "If at any point you decide I'm not the future you want, I'll respect that. But I'd expect honesty. I don't want either of us dragging something out that doesn't work." "Time matters," she had agreed. It had felt like a relief to step into something without the haze of ambiguity. And for 7 months it had worked, better than she had expected. Sam fit into her life in a way that felt natural rather than forced. He liked her friends, which mattered more to her than she usually admitted. Her circle was small but tightly knit. Mark and Devin, who had been constants in her life for years, and Lily, her best friend since middle school, who knew her well enough to finish her sentences and challenge them when needed. Sam had blended in with them easily. He laughed at their jokes, pushed back when needed, and didn't try too hard to impress anyone. It had made Sara quietly proud of him, of herself, of the ease of it all, which was why, when her lease started nearing its end, the next step had seemed obvious. The idea came to her one evening as she sat cross-legged on her couch, staring at the renewal notice sitting unopened on her coffee table. Her landlord had given her just under a month to decide. Renew or move out. Her phone buzzed, and Sam's name lit up the screen. "Hey," she said, answering. "You sound like you're negotiating a hostage situation," he replied. "Should I call professionals?" She smiled faintly. "Depends. Do professionals handle rental agreements? Only if they're emotionally devastating." "That might be accurate," she admitted. She hesitated, then added, "Can I run something by you?" "That sounds serious." "It's not serious," she said, though her tone betrayed a hint of uncertainty. "It's just something I've been thinking about." "Okay," he said gently. "I'm listening." Sara glanced at the envelope again, then spoke before she could overthink it. "My lease is up soon, and I was wondering if you'd want to try living together." There was a pause on the other end, just long enough to make her sit up straighter. "Not permanently," she added quickly. "I mean, it could be eventually, but this would just be to see if we work in that kind of space. Like a test run." Another pause. It was subtle but unmistakable. "Hey," she said softly. "You there?" "I'm here," Sam replied. His voice hadn't changed dramatically, but something had shifted. Less ease, more weight. "Okay," she said, trying to keep things light. "You paused. That's never a great sign." "I don't want to answer this off the cuff," he said. "Can we talk about it in person?" The request was reasonable, but it didn't soothe the small flicker of unease that had sparked in her chest. "Yeah, sure." "Tomorrow?" he offered. "Tomorrow works." They met the next evening at his place. Sara noticed the difference immediately, not in anything physical, but in the way he greeted her. It was still warm, still affectionate, but there was a deliberate quality to it, like he had chosen each movement ahead of time. They sat down on the couch. Sam leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on his knees, hands clasped together. "That's usually not your relaxed pose," Sara observed. "Probably because I'm not relaxed," he admitted. She exhaled softly. "Okay, that's not ominous at all." He glanced at her, then said, "You caught me off guard last night. I figured as much." "It's not that I haven't thought about it," he continued. "I have. I just didn't expect the question yet." "Well, 7 months isn't exactly rushing," she said, though her tone softened at the edges. "No," he agreed. "It's not." There was a moment of quiet before he continued, more carefully now. "I don't think it's a good idea. The words landed with more weight than she had anticipated. Sara blinked. Okay, she said slowly. Why? He shifted slightly, exhaling as if he had been holding the explanation back for some time. This isn't easy to say, and I've been going back and forth on whether it's something I could just adjust to. Her brows drew together. Adjust to what? Sit down, he said gently. I am sitting. He gave a small, humorless smile. Fair point. Just hear me out, okay? I'm listening. He nodded once. I'm not telling you who to be friends with. That's not my place. That's a strong opening for something that's definitely going somewhere, she replied quietly. It is, he admitted. I'm just trying to be clear. Go on. He took another breath. I'm not comfortable building a life with someone who spends a significant amount of her time with other men. The room felt suddenly smaller. Sara stared at him. Her expression caught somewhere between confusion and disbelief. What? I'm not accusing you of anything, he said quickly. That's not what this is. Then what is it? It's a boundary, he said. For me. She searched his face, trying to reconcile the steadiness she had always admired with the statement he had just made. You're serious. I am. You have a problem with Mark and Devin? She asked. I don't have a problem with them as people, he replied. I'm sure they're good guys. I'm saying I can't picture a future where my wife is regularly spending time with other men like that. Sara let out a slow breath, shaking her head slightly. I don't understand. I know you don't, he said. And I didn't bring it up earlier because I was trying to figure out if it was something I could get past. And? She prompted. And I don't think I can, he said quietly. Not without it eventually becoming an issue. A long silence stretched between them. Sara didn't feel angry. Not yet. Just unsettled. I'm not telling you what to do, he added. I'm telling you what I'm comfortable with. And I don't think I should be uncomfortable in my own relationship. She nodded slowly, absorbing the words. Okay, she said after a moment. He blinked slightly. Okay. I need a few days to think about this, she said. Of course, he replied immediately. I haven't made any decisions either. I just needed to be honest. She stood, smoothing her hands over her jeans as if trying to reset herself. Yeah, honesty. They walked to the door together, the ease from earlier replaced by something more fragile. As she stepped outside, the cool air hit her face, grounding her in a way the conversation hadn't. Text me when you get home? He asked. Sure, she said. She started down the steps, her mind already racing in too many directions to follow. For the first time in 7 months, clarity didn't feel kind. It felt complicated. Chapter 2. Echoes on empty streets. Sara didn't remember the drive home. She remembered starting the car, remembered adjusting the rearview mirror even though it was already perfectly angled, remembered gripping the steering wheel a little tighter than necessary, but the in-between dissolved into a blur of streetlights and quiet intersections. By the time she pulled into her parking spot, the silence inside the car felt louder than traffic ever could. She didn't move right away. Instead, she sat there, fingers still curled around the wheel, staring through the windshield at nothing in particular. I'm not comfortable building a life with someone who spends a significant amount of her time with other men. The words replayed, not harshly, not angrily. If anything, that made them harder to dismiss. Sam hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't accused her. He hadn't demanded. He had simply drawn a line. Sara leaned back against the seat and closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. Okay, she murmured under her breath. Okay, think. The word felt both like instruction and irony. She prided herself on being reasonable, on not jumping to conclusions or reacting impulsively. But this wasn't something she had a ready framework for. It wasn't a disagreement about schedules or preferences or how often to see each other. It was deeper, more structural, like he was describing the architecture of a life she hadn't realized was under inspection. Her phone buzzed softly in the cup holder. She hesitated before picking it up, already knowing who it would be. Sam, let me know when you get home. She stared at the message for a few seconds. There was nothing manipulative about it. It was a habit they had developed, simple consideration. A check-in. A way of saying I care without needing to say it out loud. Her thumbs hovered over the screen. Sara just got in. I'm okay. She stared at that for a moment, then added, we'll talk soon. A moment later, the 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, Sam. Okay, take your time. No pressure. No follow-up question. Just space. Sara set the phone down and laughed softly, though there was no real humor in it. Of course, she said to the empty car. Of course you handle this like a decent human being. It would have been easier if he hadn't. Anger would have given her direction, something to push against, something to dismiss. But this wasn't anger. It was discomfort meeting honesty, and she didn't know which one bothered her more. She finally stepped out of the car, the cool night air brushing against her skin as she made her way inside. Her apartment felt exactly the same as it had that morning, yet subtly different, as if the walls had shifted a fraction of an inch while she was gone. She tossed her bag onto the couch and kicked off her shoes, pacing once across the living room before stopping near the window. This was supposed to be simple. 7 months. Good communication. Shared goals. No drama. No games. And then one question, do you want to live together? Had cracked something open. Sara crossed her arms, leaning one shoulder against the wall. Why does this bother me so much? She asked aloud. She tried to break it down logically, the way she approached work problems. Premise. Sam is uncomfortable with how much time you spend with Mark and Devin. Constraint. He is not telling you to stop. Conclusion. He may not choose you long-term if this doesn't change. She nodded once, as if assessing her own internal presentation. Okay, fine. She pushed off the wall and wandered toward the kitchen, opening the fridge without really seeing its contents before shutting it again. So what are the variables? She continued, pacing again. Variable 1, her friendships. Mark and Devin weren't casual acquaintances. They were fixtures. People who had been around through different versions of her, bad jobs, breakups, late-night existential conversations over cheap takeout. They knew her history in ways that weren't easily replaced or replicated. And they had never crossed a line. Not once. So what's the problem? She asked the air. Variable 2, Sam. Sam, who showed up on time. Who listened. Who didn't say things he didn't mean. Who made plans for the future without making them feel like pressure. Sam, who had been very clear, from the beginning, about what he was looking for. She exhaled again, slower this time. That's not new information, she admitted quietly. He had told her. Not in these exact terms, perhaps, but the intention had always been there. Serious. Direct. Honest. So why did it feel like this came out of nowhere? Because she hadn't expected it to matter. Sara sank onto the couch, leaning forward as she rested her elbows on her knees. Her hands laced together loosely, gaze fixed on the floor. Am I missing something? She asked. She thought back over the past months, replaying interactions like scenes in a movie. Game nights with her friends. Sam sitting beside her, laughing easily, holding his own in their banter. Walks in the park where she mentioned meeting Mark earlier that day for coffee. Sam nodding, expression neutral but attentive. Group dinners where Devin teased her about her terrible sense of direction. Sam smirking quietly rather than competing for space. There had been no obvious friction. No tension. No pointed comments. Just information quietly collected. Her stomach tightened slightly as the realization settled. He's been thinking about this for a while, she said. Not reacting. Not guessing. Thinking. Trying to decide if it was something he could live with. The steadiness she admired now felt like a mirror she wasn't entirely comfortable facing. Sara stood again, too restless to stay seated, and moved back toward the window. The city outside was quieter now, the occasional car passing by like a distant thought. Okay, she said more firmly this time. What does he actually want? She replayed his words carefully. I'm not telling you who to be friends with. It's a boundary. I can't picture a future where my wife is regularly spending time with other men. Her brow furrowed. That's not a demand, she said slowly. That's a filter. It wasn't about controlling her. It was about deciding whether she fit into what he wanted. The distinction mattered. And yet, why does that feel worse? Because it meant the choice was hers. Not in the abstract sense, of course she always had a choice, but in a way that required her to define something she hadn't been forced to define before. What mattered more? Not in theory. In practice. Sara tilted her head back, staring at the ceiling. I didn't sign up for this question, she muttered. But even as she said it, she knew that wasn't true. She had, 7 months ago, across a table in a small restaurant that smelled like garlic and possibility, she had agreed to something with direction. With intention. This was just the road turning. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Lily. Lily, are you alive or have you been kidnapped by spreadsheets again? Sara huffed a small laugh despite herself. She stared at the message, thumb hovering over the keyboard. For a brief moment, she considered typing everything out, explaining, asking for an immediate reaction, something instinctive, something validating. But she hesitated, because suddenly that felt like part of the problem. Instead, she typed, Sara, alive. Just thinking. There was a pause. Then Lily, that sounds dangerous. Should I be worried? Sara smiled faintly but didn't answer right away. She set the phone down again, her gaze drifting back to the window. Yeah, she said quietly. Maybe you should be. Chapter 3. A question with teeth. Sara woke the next morning feeling like someone had replaced her thoughts with a looping track she couldn't turn off. Every variation of the same conversation replayed with slight differences. What she could have said, what she almost said, what she might say next. By mid-morning, she had already made one decision. She wasn't going to her mother. Her mother would comfort her, reassure her that she was right to feel unsettled, remind her that any man worth having should accept her exactly as she was. And while that might make her feel better for a few hours, Sara suspected it wouldn't actually answer the question sitting heavy in her chest. No, this required something sharper, blunter, uncomfortable if necessary. It required her father. That realization alone made her sigh as she reached for her keys. Fantastic, she muttered to herself. Let's go sign up for emotional whiplash. Her father's house hadn't changed much since she was a teenager. The same slightly crooked mailbox. The same front steps that creaked on the third plank. The same faint smell of coffee and old paper when she stepped inside. Like time had decided to slow down here out of respect. He was in the kitchen when she walked in, leaning against the counter with a mug in his hand, reading something on his tablet. "You're early," he said without looking up. "That usually means either something's wrong or you brought food." "No food," Sara replied, setting her bag down by the door. "Then something's wrong." He finally looked up, studying her face for a moment before nodding. "Sit." She pulled out a chair at the small kitchen table, suddenly aware that she didn't quite know where to begin. Her father sat across from her, setting his mug down with deliberate calm. "Start wherever you need to." So she did. She told him about the conversation with Sam. Not dramatically, not in a rush, but steadily, recounting the words as accurately as she could. When she finished, the kitchen fell quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Her father didn't speak right away. He leaned back slightly, eyes unfocused as he thought, fingers idly tapping once against the table before going still again. Sara shifted in her seat. "Well, still nothing. Dad," she pressed. He blinked once, then leaned forward again, fixing her with a look that was both familiar and slightly unnerving. "What do you want?" The question hit her like a misstep she hadn't prepared for. What? What do you want?" he repeated, slower this time. "That's not," she started, then stopped. "That's not what I asked. It's what matters," he replied evenly. Sara frowned, leaning back in her chair, folding her arms. "I don't know yet. That's why I'm here." He nodded once, as if acknowledging the answer but not quite accepting it. "Then why are you dating?" She blinked, caught off guard. "Because we're getting to know each other." "Okay," he said. "Then what?" Sara exhaled, turning her head slightly as if the answer might be written somewhere on the wall. "Dad, I know we're working toward marriage, but there's a lot of space between here and there." "Is there?" he asked. She turned back to him, brow furrowed. "Of course there is." He tilted his head. "Or is that just what people say when they don't want to define things yet?" Sara opened her mouth, then closed it again. "That's not fair," she said finally. He shrugged lightly. "Maybe not. But fairness isn't the same thing as truth." A flicker of frustration stirred in her chest. "Can we stay on topic?" "We are on topic," he replied calmly. "You just don't like where it's going." Sara pressed her lips together, resisting the urge to snap back. "Why do you think Sam has a problem with your friends?" he asked. She shrugged, defaulting to the first answer that came to mind. "I don't know. It sounds insecure." Her father laughed. Not loudly, not mockingly, but enough to make her straighten. "Oh, that's good," he said, shaking his head slightly. "You know, only women say that." Her eyes narrowed. "Excuse me? And they're almost always wrong," he added. She crossed her arms more tightly. "So what, he's not insecure?" He met her gaze without flinching. "Did he tell you to stop being friends with them?" "No." "Did he tell you who you can and can't see?" "No." "Then that sounds pretty secure to me." Sara hesitated, thrown off by the simplicity of the rebuttal. "He's not controlling you," her father continued. "He's treating you like an adult who can make her own decisions. He told you what he's comfortable with. That's called a boundary." She shifted again, her frustration now mixing with something less certain. "But why is he making it a big deal? I've known them for years. We're just friends." Her father nodded, as if acknowledging the point but not conceding it. He leaned back in his chair, studying her in a way that made her feel, briefly, like she was 16 again. "All right," he said. "Hypothetical question." She groaned softly. "I already hate this." "There's no right or wrong answer," he said. "That's never true when you say it. Humor me." She sighed. "Fine." He folded his hands together. "If something happened that forced you to choose, your friends or Sam, who do you pick?" The question landed with a weight she hadn't anticipated. Sara didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stared at the table, her mind reaching instinctively for a way around it. "That's not a fair question," she said finally. Her father snorted. "It's not supposed to be. It's unrealistic," she pressed. "That's not how life works." He raised an eyebrow. "You're aiming for marriage, right?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, that's the goal." "Yes, good goal," he said. "So let's not pretend you won't face uncomfortable choices at some point." She looked away again, her earlier confidence slipping. "You're asking him to dedicate his entire life to you," her father continued. "That's what marriage is. You're also asking him to accept significant risk, legal, emotional, financial, whether you like that framing or not." "I wouldn't," she started quickly. "I would never," he laughed, cutting her off gently. "You and every woman who's already done it." Her shoulders tensed. "That's not fair." "No," he agreed. "But it's reality." The words hung between them. "The point," he went on, his tone softening just slightly, "is that you're expecting a lot from him. And when I ask you a simple hypothetical, one that tests your priorities, you can't answer." Sara swallowed, her frustration now tangled with something heavier. "My guess," he said, "is that if it came down to it, you'd choose your friends. You justify it by saying you've known them longer. She hesitated again. Then, quietly, maybe. Her father nodded once. And that's your right. But it's a decision. And it's not a fair one for what you're asking him to give you. Sara stared at her hands, the room suddenly feeling too still. Here's what you need to figure out, he continued. You've been saying for years you want marriage. You want kids. A family. She nodded faintly. Are your friends going to give you that? She looked up at him, her expression caught between surprise and resistance. That's not the same thing, she said, though the conviction behind it wavered. No, he agreed. It's not. That's exactly my point. Silence settled between them again, heavier now. Having friends is important, her father said. But if you build your life around them, you'll stay right where you are. Because no man who's serious about building a family wants to feel like he's competing for his wife's loyalty. Sara exhaled slowly, her thoughts shifting in ways she hadn't expected. He's offering his life, her father added. The least you can do is take that seriously. She didn't answer, didn't know how to. If you decide you don't want to marry him, he said, that's fine. Do it for the right reasons. Not because you're clinging to something that doesn't actually align with what you say you want. Sara swallowed, her throat suddenly tight. People grow, he said quietly. Relationships change. That's normal. He leaned back again, the intensity of the moment easing just slightly. For what it's worth, he added almost casually, he's the first guy you've brought around that I actually like. Sara let out a small, incredulous breath. Of course you do, he shrugged. It would be a shame to see you throw that away. She shook her head faintly, but there was no real disagreement in the gesture. Especially, he continued, a hint of dry humor returning to his voice, since I'm rather fond of the idea of future grandkids. Despite everything, she laughed. Just a little, but it was enough to break the tension. And as the laughter faded, Sara realized something unsettling. For the first time since the conversation with Sam, she wasn't just confused. She was starting to understand why it mattered. Chapter 4. The space between two roads. Sara left her father's house with more clarity than comfort. The sky had shifted from late morning brightness to the softer gray of early afternoon, clouds drifting slowly overhead as if time itself had decided to move with deliberate caution. She stood beside her car for a moment, keys in hand, not yet ready to get in. Her father hadn't told her what to do. That would have been easier. Instead, he had done something far more inconvenient. He had handed the decision back to her, stripped of excuses and softened edges. No dramatic ultimatums, no prescribed answers. Just questions with teeth, the kind that lingered long after they were asked. What do you want? She exhaled sharply, pressing her lips together. I hate that question, she muttered, because she should know. At 28, after years of saying she wanted marriage, a family, something stable and lasting, she should have been able to articulate it without hesitation. And yet, when it came down to it, when the hypothetical became something real and immediate, she had stalled. Not because she didn't care, but because she cared about more than one thing, and for the first time they didn't fit neatly together. She got into her car and started the engine, but instead of heading home, she pulled out slowly and drove without a destination. The familiar streets blurred past her window, neighborhoods shifting from residential quiet to pockets of busier intersections. Her mind, however, stayed fixed on one place, that question. If something forced you to choose, she tightened her grip on the steering wheel. There is no force, she said aloud, as if correcting the premise itself. No one is making me choose. But even as she said it, the flaw was obvious. Sam wasn't forcing her. He was filtering. And that distinction had started to settle uncomfortably deep. She pulled into a small park a few minutes later, one she had passed hundreds of times but rarely stopped at. It was mostly empty. Just a few scattered benches, a walking path, and a couple sitting quietly beneath a tree, their conversation soft enough to disappear into the breeze. Sara turned off the engine and stepped out, drawn almost instinctively toward the path. Gravel crunched lightly under her shoes as she walked, her arms folding loosely across her chest. Okay, she said under her breath. Let's stop circling. She paused near a bench but didn't sit, staring out at the open grass instead. What do I actually want? This time, she didn't let herself deflect. The first answer came quickly, almost reflexive. I want a family. Her voice was quiet, but the statement felt solid. She had always known that part. It wasn't a vague hope or something abstract. It was specific: kids, a partner, a home that felt like it belonged to something bigger than just her. She closed her eyes briefly. And I want it to last. That part mattered just as much. Not just having something, but building something that endured. Sara opened her eyes again, exhaling slowly. Okay, she said. So where does everything else fit? Her thoughts shifted, uncomfortably, toward Mark and Devon. She pictured them easily. Mark's easy sarcasm, Devon's tendency to overthink everything out loud. They weren't temporary people in her life. They had been there through years of change, through versions of herself she barely recognized now. They weren't placeholders. They were history. They matter, she said quietly. That wasn't up for debate. But her father's question lingered stubbornly beneath that truth. Are they going to give you that life you say you want? She shook her head faintly. No. The answer was simple. Too simple. And that doesn't mean they're less important, she added quickly, almost defensively, even though no one was there to argue with her. But the clarification felt incomplete, like it was missing something she hadn't fully acknowledged yet. Sarah began walking again, slower this time. What am I actually being asked to do? Because that was the part she kept circling around. Sam hadn't told her to cut them off, hadn't demanded she stop seeing them entirely. He had simply said he couldn't envision a future where his wife was spending significant time with other men. The phrasing was careful, intentional, frustratingly reasonable. She stopped walking again, that realization settling in her chest. It's not about whether I have friends, she said slowly. It's about how I structure my life around them. And suddenly that felt different, less like an attack, more like an incompatibility waiting to be examined. Sarah rubbed her forehead, her thoughts turning inward again. How much time do I spend with them? She started mentally listing it out. Weekly coffee with Mark, occasional lunches with Devin when schedules lined up, group hangs that blurred into late evenings, spontaneous meetups when someone had a bad day or just needed distraction. It wasn't excessive, but it wasn't minimal either. It was comfortable, habitual. She's built into their routine, she realized quietly, and they were built into hers. She exhaled slowly, her shoulders dropping just a fraction. That's what he's seeing. Not wrongdoing, not betrayal, but a pattern, a life already shaped in a certain way. And he was asking himself whether he fit into that shape or whether it would have to change. Sarah sank onto the bench at last, elbows resting on her knees as she leaned forward, staring at her hands. Would I change it? She asked. The question felt heavier than all the others. Not for pressure, she added quickly. Not because I'm being told to. That mattered. Autonomy mattered. But was that the only lens to look through? I would change things for something better, she said slowly. Something aligned. Something chosen. Her chest tightened slightly as a new thought surfaced, quieter but sharper. Have I been assuming I can keep everything exactly the same and just add him in? She let that sit, because now, for the first time, it felt like the answer might be yes. And maybe that had been the real disconnect all along. Sarah let out a soft breath, leaning back against the bench, tilting her head toward the sky. You don't get to build something new without changing something old, she murmured. It wasn't a judgment. It wasn't even fully a decision yet. But it was a recognition. The road wasn't splitting between right and wrong. It was splitting between two different versions of her life. One where everything stayed largely the same, where her friendships remained central and unchanged. And one where something shifted, where her priorities restructured to make space for something deeper, more permanent, but also more demanding. Neither path was inherently wrong, but they weren't identical. And choosing one meant letting go of the other, at least in part. Sarah closed her eyes again, her father's voice echoing in her memory. Do it for the right reasons. She opened them slowly. Okay, she said, her voice steadier than it had been since the night before. Then I need to figure out what the right reason actually is. Chapter 5, the first honest answer. Sarah didn't rush her decision. For once in her life, she resisted the urge to talk it out immediately, to triangulate her feelings through Lily's quick instincts, or cushion them with Mark's humor, or let Devin dissect the situation until it lost its emotional edge. Each of those paths would have given her something, but none of them would have given her ownership. So she did something unfamiliar. She stayed quiet. That afternoon bled into evening, and by the time the sky dimmed into soft blues and distant amber lights flickered on, Sarah found herself back in her apartment, sitting cross-legged on the floor with her back against the couch. The same space she had paced the night before. The same room that felt different now, not because anything had changed physically, but because she had. Her phone sat face down beside her. She hadn't reached for it in over an hour. That alone felt like progress. She rested her chin lightly on her hand, staring at nothing in particular. All right, she said softly. No distractions. The words weren't dramatic, but they felt deliberate. She closed her eyes, letting the noise of everything, her father's voice, Sam's calm explanation, her own defensive reactions, fade just enough to find something quieter underneath. What is the real problem here? Not Sam's boundary, not her friends. The real problem. Her brow furrowed slightly as she followed the thought. It's not that he asked, she murmured. That part, if she was being honest, made sense now. Maybe not intuitively at first, but logically. A man who was serious about marriage, thinking about how his future would look, that wasn't unreasonable. And it's not that I have friends, she continued. That's not even the issue. She shifted slightly, her back pressing more firmly against the couch. No, she said slowly. The real problem is that I don't know how much I'm willing to change for what I say I want. There it was. Not comfortable, but clear. Sarah let out a quiet breath, her shoulders relaxing just slightly. Because clarity, even when it stung, was still clarity. She leaned her head back, eyes opening again to stare up at the ceiling. I've been acting like I can have everything exactly as it is now, just with him added in, she said. But that's not how this works. It never had been. Every relationship she had ever seen, her parents, friends, even the healthier couples she admired, had adapted over time. Priorities shifted. Time redistributed. Boundaries adjusted. Not out of loss, out of choice. So what does that actually look like for me? She asked. That question felt more grounded, less abstract. She closed her eyes again, picturing it, not as a vague idea, but as something tangible. Fewer casual one-on-ones with Mark. Not because he was suddenly unwelcome in her life, but because the frequency and intimacy of that dynamic might need to change shape. The same with Devin. Not gone, not erased, but recalibrated. Group settings, shared spaces, a different rhythm. She inhaled slowly as the thought settled. Would I resent that? She asked herself quietly. That mattered. If the answer was yes, if she felt like she was losing something essential, then the decision would already be made. She sat with it, really sat with it, turned it over carefully instead of reacting to the first emotional flicker. And, to her surprise, the answer wasn't what she'd expected. No, she said finally. Not if it's my choice. The distinction mattered more than anything. She wasn't being forced. She wasn't being told who to cut off, what to give up, how to behave. She was being given information, a boundary, and then being asked implicitly, does this work for you? Sara let out a soft breath, her mind shifting again. Would I do the same for someone else? She wondered. If she imagined Sam regularly spending time, one-on-one, casually, habitually, with two women he had a history with, would it sit entirely comfortably? She winced slightly. Probably not, she admitted. Not because she didn't trust him, but because it would feel complicated. Not wrong, not necessarily threatening, but not simple. And maybe that was the point. It's not about trust, she said quietly. It's about what kind of dynamic you want to live inside every day. That realization settled deeper than the others, because it reframed everything. Sam wasn't accusing her of doing something wrong. He was saying, this dynamic doesn't feel like the kind of life I want long-term. And now she had to decide whether she did. Sara shifted again, pulling her knees slightly closer to her chest as she rested her arms loosely around them. Okay, she said. Her voice was steadier now, not completely certain, but no longer drifting. If I choose him, what am I actually choosing? It wasn't just Sam. It was everything that came with him. Consistency, clarity, a future that had intention behind it. And yes, limits, boundaries, expectations, a life that required prioritization, responsibility, growth. Her lips curved faintly. Basically, adulthood with less wiggle room, she said. And then, if I choose my current life exactly as it is, freedom, familiarity, no immediate pressure to restructure anything. Her friendships staying exactly where they were, unchanged and comfortable. But also, no guarantee of what came next. No guarantee that the kind of man she said she wanted would simply slot into that structure without friction. She exhaled slowly. That's the trade-off. Not good versus bad. Not right versus wrong. Just different costs. Sara sat in the quiet for a long time after that, letting the weight of the decision settle without trying to rush it away. When she finally moved, it wasn't out of restlessness. It was out of resolution. She reached for her phone, turning it over in her hands, staring at the screen for a moment before unlocking it. Her thumb hovered over Sam's name. She didn't feel panicked, didn't feel defensive, didn't feel like she needed to argue her way through anything. For the first time since that conversation, she felt aligned. Not because the decision was easy, but because it was hers. Sara tapped the screen and brought the phone to her ear. It rang once, twice. Then, hey, Sam said. His voice was calm, steady, the same as always, but there was a subtle note of something else beneath it. Waiting, careful. Hey, she replied softly. There was a brief pause. Are you okay? He asked. She smiled faintly. I think I am, she said. Another pause. Do you want to talk? He asked. She exhaled slowly, her gaze drifting toward the window as the last light of the evening faded into something quieter. Yeah, she said. And then, more clearly, I'm ready to talk. Chapter 6, Terms of a Future. Sam didn't fill the silence after she said she was ready. He let it sit, steady, patient, the way he always did when something mattered. It wasn't passive. It was deliberate, like he trusted her to speak when she was ready, and that whatever she said would be worth hearing. Sara walked slowly toward her window as she held the phone to her ear, looking out at the quiet street below. I've been thinking, she began. I figured, he replied gently. She almost smiled. Yeah, probably obvious. Do you want me to just listen? He asked. Or do you want this to be a back and forth? She considered that for a moment. Both, she decided. But let me start. Okay. She leaned her forehead lightly against the cool glass, grounding herself. I didn't react the way I expected to, she admitted. Not right away. I thought I'd be defensive. Or angry. You weren't, he said. No, she agreed. And I've been trying to figure out why. There was a soft pause. Then he said, "What did you come up with?" Sara exhaled slowly. "Because you weren't attacking me," she said. "You weren't accusing me of anything. You just told me what you're comfortable with." "Yes. And that's what made it harder," she added quietly. "Because I couldn't just dismiss it." Sam didn't respond immediately, but she could almost hear the acknowledgement in the silence. "I talked to my dad," she continued. "That got a faint reaction." "That sounds intense." She huffed a small laugh. "That's one word for it." "What did he say?" Sara hesitated. Not because she wasn't willing to share, but because she wanted to be precise. "He asked me what I want," she said, "and I couldn't answer right away." Sam was quiet again, listening closely. "And then he asked me why I'm dating," she added, which was irritatingly effective. "I can imagine," Sam said. Sara pushed off the window, pacing slowly now. "He basically said that I've been talking about marriage and family for years, that that's the direction I'm supposed to be moving in. And then he pointed out that when he asked me a hypothetical, whether I choose you or my friends, I hesitated. There was a longer pause this time. "What would your answer have been?" Sam asked carefully. Sara stopped pacing. Her heart kicked a little harder, not from fear, but from the weight of answering honestly. "I don't think I would have chosen you," she said. She didn't soften it, didn't qualify it, just told the truth. Sam exhaled slowly on the other end. Not sharply, not hurt in an obvious way, but affected. "Okay," he said. Sara closed her eyes briefly. "That's not where I ended up," she added quickly. "But it's where I was." "Talk to me about the difference," he said. His voice hadn't hardened. If anything, it had become more focused. She nodded, even though he couldn't see it. "The difference is, I realized I've been thinking about this wrong," she said. "I've been assuming I can keep everything exactly the same and just add you in." She resumed pacing, more purposeful now. "But that's not realistic," she continued. "Not if I actually want what I say I want." "And what is that?" he asked. "A real partnership," she said. "Something that lasts. A family eventually. All of it." The words felt steady now. Chosen. Not just repeated out of habit. Sam didn't interrupt, so she kept going. "And I don't think you're asking me to give up my friends," she said. "Not really." "I'm not," he confirmed. "I know," she said. "I didn't fully understand that at first. It sounded like you were drawing a line around them. But it's not about them. It's about the role they play in my life." "Yes," he said, more firmly now. "Exactly." Sara felt a small, unexpected sense of relief at that. "I thought about how much time I spend with them," she said. "And it's not excessive, but it's consistent. Predictable. They're part of my routine. And that matters," Sam said. "It does," she agreed. "But I also asked myself something else." "What?" She hesitated for just a fraction of a second. "If the situation were reversed, would I be completely comfortable with it?" There was a quiet shift on the line. "And?" he prompted. "I wouldn't," she admitted. "Not entirely. I tell myself I trust you, and I would, but it would still feel complicated." Sam let out a breath that almost sounded like he'd been holding it. "Yeah," he said softly. "That's where I've been." Sara nodded slowly. "I get that now," she said. Another pause, but this one felt different. Less tense. More aligned. "So where does that leave you?" he asked. She stopped pacing again, standing in the middle of the room. "It leaves me with a choice," she said. "Yes. And I want to be really clear about something before I answer," she continued. "Because this matters to me. I'm listening. I'm not going to make a decision because I feel pressured," she said. "Or because I think it's what I'm supposed to say. I wouldn't want you to," he said immediately. "And I'm not going to pretend I don't value my friends," she added. "Because I do. They've been part of my life for a long time." "I know." She took a breath, steadying herself. "But I also can't ignore what I realized today," she said. "And what's that?" "That the life I say I want, really want, doesn't stay intact without changes," she said. "Something has to shift." Her voice grew quieter, but more certain. "And I get why this is one of those things for you." Sam didn't speak right away. When he finally did, his voice carried something she hadn't heard before. Not doubt, not hesitation. Hope. "So what are you saying?" he asked. Sara swallowed once. "I'm saying I'm willing to change the structure of my friendships," she said. "Not because you told me to, but because I understand what you're building toward, and I want to see if I can build that with you." The words settled between them, solid and deliberate. Sam let out a slow breath. "I need to understand what that means to you," he said carefully. "That's fair," she replied. She moved back toward the couch, sitting down this time. "It means I wouldn't prioritize one-on-one time with them the way I do now," she said. "It would shift more toward group settings. Less routine-based, more occasional." "And you're okay with that?" he asked. "I think so," she said honestly. "But I'm not going to pretend I know exactly what that looks like yet. I'd need to figure it out as we go." "That's reasonable," he said. She nodded again, even though he couldn't see her. And I need you to understand something too, she added. Okay. This only works if we're both still choosing each other, she said. Not tolerating. Not compromising ourselves into resentment. Actually choosing. There was no hesitation in his response this time. I agree. The simplicity of it surprised her. You do? She asked. Yes, he said. That's what I've been trying to do this whole time. Sara let out a soft breath, something inside her loosening at last. Okay, she said quietly. Another pause, but this one wasn't heavy. It was steady, grounded. So, Sam said carefully, as if stepping onto uncertain ground. Where does that leave us? Sara traced a small, absent pattern on the fabric of her couch with her fingers, thinking about how differently that question would have sounded to her just a day ago. Now, it didn't feel like pressure, felt like direction. It leaves us trying, she said. Sam was quiet for a moment. Trying? To see if what we both want actually lines up in practice, she clarified. Not just in theory. There was a slight shift in his tone, something cautious but hopeful. That sounds like a good starting point. It is, she said. Then, after a beat, but I think we need to be clear about what trying actually means. I agree, Sam replied. She nodded again, even though he couldn't see it. I don't want this to turn into something vague, she continued. Like, we say we'll figure it out and then avoid the hard parts until they blow up later. That's not my style, he said. I know, she said softly. It's not mine either. That's why we're here. A small pause followed, not uncomfortable this time, just thoughtful. So what are you thinking? He asked. Sara inhaled slowly, organizing her thoughts. I think we need to give this some structure, she said. Not rigid, but intentional. Okay, he said, attentive now. She leaned back against the couch, one leg tucked beneath her. If I'm going to shift how I spend my time with Mark and Devin, I need it to feel integrated into what we're building, she explained. Not like I'm quietly cutting parts of my life away and pretending it doesn't matter. I wouldn't want that either, Sam said. Good, she replied. Because if this turns into me resenting the change, it won't last. And that's not fair to either of us. Agreed. She exhaled, then continued more carefully. So instead of thinking about it like I'm losing something, she said, I want to think about what we're building together, and how everything else fits around that. Sam's voice softened. That's exactly how I see it. Then we're on the same page, she said. Another pause. Then he asked, what does that look like day to day? Sara smiled faintly, appreciating the precision of the question. It looks like me being more intentional with my time, she said. Not just defaulting to old habits because they're easy. It looks like prioritizing us, not just when it's convenient, but consistently. And your friends? He asked. They're still part of my life, she said firmly, but not in a way that competes with what we're building. More shared spaces, less separate lanes. Okay, Sam said, absorbing that. And I think, she added, we should talk about this again in a few weeks, not because I expect things to go wrong, but because I want to make sure we're both actually comfortable with how it feels, not just how it sounds right now. That's fair, he said. I like that. She paused, then added quietly, I need you to be honest with me if something doesn't feel right. I will, he said. Even if it's uncomfortable, she pressed. Especially then, he replied. She let out a small breath, something easing in her chest. Good, she said. They both fell quiet for a moment, but this silence was different from the others. It wasn't filled with uncertainty. It was settled. Not final, but grounded. Sara? Sam said after a few seconds. Yeah. I need to say something, he said. Her posture straightened slightly. Okay. I meant what I said before, he continued. About wanting something real. Something lasting. I know. And this, what we just talked about, it matters to me, he said. Not because I want control, but because I don't want to build something halfway. Sara's throat tightened slightly, but in a good way this time. I don't either, she said. Another pause, softer now. I was worried, he admitted. About what? About losing you over something like this, he said honestly. She smiled faintly, tilting her head slightly as she looked toward the window again. You almost did, she said. He exhaled, a quiet sound. Yeah. Not because of what you said, she clarified, but because I would have misunderstood it. He didn't respond right away. Are you still worried? She asked. There was a small pause. Less, he said. Not completely gone, but less. That's fair, she said. You? He asked. Sara thought about it. About the version of her from yesterday, confused, defensive, unsure. And the version of her now, still uncertain in some ways but no longer drifting. Less, she echoed. Another quiet stretch followed. Then Sam said, a hint lighter? So, no moving in tomorrow? She laughed, the sound genuine and unforced for the first time in days. No, she said. Definitely not tomorrow. That's probably wise. Extremely, she agreed. But someday? He asked. The question wasn't heavy. Not urgent. Just open. Sara smiled faintly, her voice soft but certain. Someday, she said. Chapter 7. The shape of what comes next. The word someday lingered between them a moment longer than either of them expected. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't a promise carved in stone. But it wasn't empty either. Sara shifted slightly on the couch, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear as she let the silence settle into something softer. So, she said after a beat, her voice lighter now, what does after this conversation look like? Sam let out a quiet breath, almost like he'd been waiting for that question. More normal than the last 48 hours, I hope. She smiled faintly. That would be nice. I don't expect everything to change overnight, he added. That's not realistic. And honestly, I don't want it to feel forced. Good, she said. Because if I suddenly disappear from everyone's lives, that would feel dramatic. Yeah, he agreed. Let's avoid dramatic. Sara leaned back, her shoulders relaxing for what felt like the first time since all of this started. I think what changes first is just how I think about things, she said. Less automatic, more intentional. Meaning, Sam prompted. Meaning if Mark texts me to grab coffee like we always do, I'll actually stop and think about whether it makes sense, she explained. Not just say yes because it's Tuesday and that's what we do. Sam didn't interrupt. And that might mean saying no sometimes, she continued. Or suggesting something else, like group plans instead. And how do you think that's going to go over? He asked, not skeptically, just carefully. Sara let out a small, thoughtful breath. Honestly, she said, probably confusing at first. That's fair. But they're not unreasonable people, she added. They might ask questions. They might joke about it. But they're not going to fall apart. She paused, then added more quietly. And if they do have a problem with it, I guess I'll have to deal with that when it comes. Sam's voice softened again. That's part of it, yeah. Sara glanced down at her hands. I'm realizing something kind of obvious, she said. What's that? That I've been avoiding having to define these boundaries, she admitted. Not because I didn't think about them, but because nothing forced me to. And now it is, Sam said. Yeah, she nodded. But I don't think that's a bad thing anymore. There was a slight shift on the line, something like relief. I'm glad, he said. Another pause followed, but it felt lighter again, more conversational. So what about us? She asked. Aside from all of this, Sam chuckled softly. You mean the part where we still have an actual relationship? Exactly that part. I think we keep doing what we've been doing, he said. Seeing each other regularly, not overcomplicating it. That sounds refreshing, she said. But maybe, he added, we start being a little more intentional about future stuff too. She tilted her head slightly. Like what? Not decisions, he clarified quickly. Just conversations. Making sure we're on the same page about the bigger things. Sara considered that. Okay, she said slowly. What kind of bigger things? Sam paused briefly before answering, choosing his words with care. Lifestyle for one, he said. How we see our time being spent long-term. What priorities look like. Things like that. Sara nodded even though he couldn't see. That actually ties into all of this, she said. More than I realized. It does, he agreed. And I think I'm starting to understand why you brought it up now, she added. Do you? He asked. Yeah, she said. Because once you start talking about moving in or anything beyond that, this stuff stops being theoretical. Exactly. She smiled faintly. You really don't like waiting for problems to show up, do you? No, he said simply. I prefer to deal with things before they grow. Annoyingly responsible, she teased. I try. The ease between them returned almost without effort. Felt familiar, comfortable, and, in some quiet way, stronger than it had before. Sara shifted again, curling her legs to the side as she settled deeper into the couch. Can I ask you something? She said. You can always ask. What would you have done? She asked carefully. If I'd said no? He didn't answer right away. Not because he didn't want to, but because he was considering the question seriously. I would have had to think about whether it worked for me long-term, he said finally. And? She pressed. And I probably would have stepped back, he admitted. The honesty of it didn't sting the way she thought it might. Instead, it felt consistent. You wouldn't have tried to convince me? She asked. No, he said. Why not? Because that wouldn't solve the real issue, he replied. If you don't actually agree with something like this, convincing you doesn't make it go away. It just delays it. Sara nodded slowly. That makes sense, she said. And I don't want to be in something where we're quietly hoping the other person changes, he added. I want to know we're choosing the same direction. She smiled faintly. That sounds familiar, she said. He chuckled. Yeah, I think you said something similar earlier. I did, she admitted. Another brief pause followed. Then Sara said, softer this time, thank you. Sam's tone shifted slightly. For what? For not making this a fight, she said. For just being clear. He took a moment before responding. I didn't want to fight you, he said. I just wanted to be honest. I know, she replied. And you handled it better than I expected, he added. She laughed lightly. Wow, what a compliment. I mean it in a good way, he said quickly. You actually thought about it. Most people would have just reacted. Sara smiled, her gaze drifting again toward the window. I almost did, she admitted. I just didn't get the chance. Why not? She considered that for a second. Because I couldn't find something to be angry at, she said finally. And that forced me to actually listen. Yeah, he said quietly. That'll do it. They both fell silent again. Not because there was nothing left to say, but because, for once, everything important had already been said. After a few seconds, Sara let out a soft breath. So, she said, a hint of lightness returning. What are you doing tomorrow? Sam hesitated, caught slightly off guard by the shift. Working, he said. Living a very thrilling life. Good, she replied. Because I think we should see each other. I agree, he said immediately. Low-key, she added. No heavy discussions. No life restructuring. I can handle that, he said. Maybe dinner, she suggested. Something simple. Simple sounds perfect. Sara smiled, a quiet warmth settling in her chest. Okay, she said softly. Okay, he echoed. Neither of them rushed to hang up. The call lingered a little longer. Small things, lighter conversation, the kind that felt easy again. And as Sara finally ended the call, setting her phone down beside her, she realized something she hadn't expected. Nothing had been solved perfectly. Nothing had been finalized. But something important had shifted. Not just between them, within her. For the first time since the question had been asked, she didn't feel like she was standing at a crossroads. She felt like she had taken a step forward. Chapter 8. A different kind of beginning. The restaurant Sara chose the next evening wasn't new and wasn't impressive. And that was exactly why she picked it. It was small, familiar, and comfortable in a way that didn't demand anything from either of them. No background pressure, no sense that the moment had to mean something more than it already did. When she arrived, Sam was already there, sitting at a corner table with a glass of water in front of him. He looked up as she approached, the brief flash of uncertainty in his expression softening almost immediately when he met her eyes. Hey, he said, standing. Hey, she replied, smiling faintly. There was a half-second hesitation, just enough to acknowledge that things had been complicated. Then he leaned in, pressed a quick, natural kiss to her cheek, and pulled her chair out for her. It wasn't dramatic. It was better than that. It was normal. Traffic okay? He asked as she sat down. Mostly, she said. I think half the city decided to leave at the exact same time. Bold strategy, he said. Did it work out for them? Unclear, she replied dryly. A small smile flickered across his face. The conversation drifted easily after that. Menus, work updates, a brief story about a coworker's accidental reply, all that had spiraled into mild chaos. It wasn't forced. It wasn't artificial. But underneath it, there was an unspoken awareness, like both of them recognized they had crossed through something, and now they were figuring out how to stand on the other side without losing themselves in it. After their food arrived, the conversation slowed just slightly. Not heavy, not tense, but more grounded. Sara set her fork down, glancing at him. So, this feels nice, she said. It does, Sam agreed. There was a brief pause. Are we avoiding the topic? She asked. Not intentionally, he said. But I'm also not trying to drag us back into it right away. Fair, she said. I just don't want it to feel like we can only talk about it when things get tense. That's a good point, he admitted. She nodded once, then leaned back slightly in her chair. I told Mark today I couldn't meet for coffee this week, she said. Sam's gaze sharpened. Not alarmed, but attentive. Okay, he said. How did that go? Sara gave a small, rueful smile. As expected. Meaning, he was confused, she said. Then suspicious. Then slightly dramatic about it. Sam huffed a quiet laugh. Sounds about right. I didn't get into everything, she added. I just said I had some other priorities this week. Did he push? A little, she admitted. But not in a bad way. Just curiosity. And how did that feel? Sam asked. Sara considered that honestly. Strange, she said. But not wrong. Sam nodded slowly. I didn't feel like I was doing something I didn't want, she continued. It just felt new. That makes sense, he said. She watched him for a moment, then added, I think that's going to be the theme for a while. New. Yeah, she said. Not better or worse. Just different rhythms. Sam leaned back slightly, his expression thoughtful. I don't expect perfection, he said. I just want progress that feels real. That's fair, she replied. They let the conversation settle again for a few seconds, the clink of cutlery and low background chatter filling the space between them. Then Sam said, I've been thinking about something too. Sara tilted her head slightly. Oh, I don't want this to turn into you feeling like you have to constantly prove something to me, he said. She blinked. What do you mean? I mean, he continued carefully. I brought this up because it matters to me. Not so I could watch and evaluate every decision you make. Sara studied him. Something in his tone easing a tension she hadn't fully acknowledged she was carrying. So you're not keeping tally? She asked lightly. He shook his head. No, that would defeat the whole point. Good, she said, because that would get exhausting very quickly. I imagine so, he agreed. She smiled faintly, then looked down at her plate for a moment before speaking again. I don't feel like I'm losing anything, she said. Sam didn't interrupt. I thought I would, she added. At least a little, but it doesn't feel like that. What does it feel like? He asked. She paused, searching for the right words. Reorganization, she said finally. Like things are being put in a different order, not removed. Sam considered that, then nodded. That's actually a really good way to put it. Sara shrugged lightly. I've had time to think about it. I can tell. She smiled, then met his gaze more directly. I do need something from you though. Okay. If this ever starts feeling off again, she said. I don't want it to get parked quietly in the background. It won't, he said immediately. I mean it, she pressed. I'd rather deal with it early than have it show up later when it's harder to fix. I agree, he said. And I'll hold you to the same. Good, she said. Another pause, short, comfortable. Then Sam said, almost casually, you know, this is probably the least dramatic version of a relationship conflict I've ever been part of. Sara laughed, the sound bright and unguarded. Don't say that too loudly, she said. We might jinx it. He smiled. Fair enough. They finished dinner without rushing, conversation weaving easily between light topics and small, thoughtful check-ins. Nothing felt forced. Nothing felt like it needed to be resolved immediately, and that, more than anything, felt new. As they stepped outside afterward, the air was cool and quiet, the kind of evening that invited lingering. Sara wrapped her light jacket a little more tightly around herself as they walked toward his car. So, Sam said, glancing at her. Successful first step? She considered it for a moment. Not just the dinner, not just the day, but everything that had led up to it. Yeah, she said. Then, after a beat, I think it is. They reached the car, but neither of them moved to get in right away. Hey, he said, a hint of something softer threading into his voice. Yeah, I meant what I said before, he continued, about building something real. I know, she said, and I don't expect it to be perfect, he added. I just want it to be honest. Sara smiled, meeting his gaze. I can do honest, she said. He smiled back, something quiet and certain settling in his expression. Good. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Sara stepped a little closer, closing the small space between them, and rested her hand lightly against his arm. Not a dramatic gesture, just a simple one, chosen, intentional. And this time, when they kissed, there was no hesitation behind it. Only the quiet understanding that whatever came next wouldn't be accidental. It would be built, together,